Okay, let's talk about transforming your containers from, just functional to absolutely flawless by mastering the Dockerfile. Welcome to this explainer. If you're in IT, you already know that efficient containerization is the absolute backbone of modern deployment. So let's dive right in and figure out how to perfect it.
At its core, a Docker file is essentially just a text file with instructions for building a Docker image. But honestly, think of it less like code and more like a step-by-step recipe. Just like a master chef follows a super precise sequence to prep a meal, you follow a Docker file to prep your container. And today, we're going to make sure your recipe is literally Michelin star quality.
Here is our menu for today's explainer. 1. Ingredients of a Docker file. 2. Best practices for builders. 3. Optimizing for production. 4. Common container mistakes. And finally, 5. A real-world example.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Ingredients of a Docker file and Syntax Basics.
Now, the core syntax is actually incredibly simple. There are really just 4 essential instructions that make up the foundation of your recipe. First up is from, which specifies your starting point or your base image. Then there's run, which basically stirs the pot by executing commands during the build process. Next is copy, which literally copies files from your local machine straight into the container. And finally, expose, which specifies the exact ports your container will be listening on. Once you've got a handle on these 4, you are well on your way.
Moving right along to Section 2, Best Practices for Builders and Prep Work.
So, keeping your digital kitchen clean is absolutely crucial. You really want to avoid complex logic and crazy conditional statements in your code. Because let's face it, messy code leads to messy deployments. Instead, you've got to aim for a simple, straightforward approach. Keeping the recipe concise makes your container infinitely more reliable. Seriously, don't overcomplicate the recipe.
A clean kitchen also means precise labeling. You absolutely need to use a consistent naming convention for your images and containers. When you're managing dozens or even hundreds of containers, having an organized system makes tracking an absolute breeze. It's kind of like clearly labeling all your pantry ingredients. It just saves you a massive headache later on.
Let's dive into Section 3, Optimizing for Production and Trimming the Fat.
Trimming the fat is all about speed and efficiency, right? Your #1 goal for production is minimizing that overall image size. To do that, start by choosing a much smaller base image right out of the gate. Then, you've got to ruthlessly remove any unnecessary files or dependencies. Stripping out all that bloat means downloading and deploying your container is going to be lightning fast. In production, literally every megabyte counts.
And that brings us to a real game changer, the multi-stage build process. By splitting up your Docker file into 2 steps, Step 1 for the build environment and Step 2 for the runtime environment, you safely separate the messy prep kitchen from the pristine dining room. You compile everything in Step 1, and then you only carry the finished, totally necessary files over into Step 2. It keeps those production images incredibly lean.
Now for Section 4, Common Container Mistakes and Kitchen Nightmares.
Okay, I see this mistake all the time. Using the latest tag for a base image, it feels super convenient, but it's basically like throwing a total mystery ingredient into your pot. It can cause massive problems if that new version happens to be incompatible with your application. Always use a specific version tag. It makes sure your base image is predictable, tested, and actually reliable. You know exactly what you're getting.
Here's another simple but completely fatal mistake: forgetting to specify your working directory. Without it, your application might just execute in some completely random location and crash the whole system. If your app expects to be run from a very specific directory and it's not there, yeah, it's going to break. It's an easy recipe for disaster, but it's 100% preventable just by defining that working directory right up front.
Finally, Section 5, a real-world example and the signature dish.
Let's take a look at a real-world Docker file for a Python web application. This is our literal recipe card. Notice how we start with a really precise Python base image, then install the Flask library and map out our files. It's super concise. It completely avoids that dreaded latest tag by specifying version 3.9 Slim, and it clearly lays out the exact foundation the container needs.
Let's quickly break down exactly what's happening step by step. Step 1, we set that base image to Python 3.9 Slim. Boom, 2 best practices checked off right there. Step 2, we use the run command to install our dependencies, specifically grabbing Flask. Step 3, we copy our files into the app directory, and crucially, we use workdir to lock in that exact location. Finally, Step 4, we expose port 80 and set the command to actually run our app. Now, that is a perfect production-ready recipe.
So it all boils down to this.
Is your Dockerfile truly production ready? By nailing the basic syntax, ditching all that complex logic, trimming the fat, and dodging traps like the latest tag, you can completely transform your entire workflow. Get in there, review your own code today, and see just how much you can optimize.